Wait, boom, let me just check. Is there sound? Yes, there is sound. Boom, according to that, I am live. Ah, I guess that's what happens when I take a week off. You remember last time, actually, I had problems with the good camera. It froze in the middle of the show, and it froze just as I was setting it up just now. So I guess that super cheap um, USB HDMI capture thing that I was using, it was nice, but it doesn't seem to be working very well. So good thing it froze just before the show started. I got my old USB camera and I plugged it in, and it's working good enough. Honestly, my face isn't really what most of you are probably coming for. Sorry that I wasn't here last week. Just a lot of stuff going on at home, and I just needed to take the night off. I don't do it very often, but thank you for your patience with that. Great to see everybody in here today. In fact, so many people already. In fact, Shubus arrived like 20 minutes early, making coffee. Glad to see. Buenos dias. Good to have a person from Panama in. Great to see everybody actually coming in. Indeed. Wow, there's lots of butter, peanuts, lots of stuff there. Thank you for approving that. I assume, Erin, a wonderful moderator. Great to have you in here every week. Great to see you. Of course, Sunday morning where you are. Yes, technical issues are indeed a feature. There's always something. I'm really feeling like this computer, I actually got it like more than 10 years ago now, and it was a really high spec custom build at the time, and it still is actually pretty solid. It still renders video well and everything, but I'm missing things like I want USB-C, and I want and I want a nice setup that I can just plug everything into and it just works reliably all the time. And I feel like maybe I should be getting a new PC soon. Yeah, it's still got a bit more life in it, but yeah, anyway. um, as usual, I mean, I guess it's been like this everywhere, other than the pandemic and the terrible war going on in Ukraine. Not a lot of news stories, actually. Even covering 2 weeks as I did, there wasn't a lot that stood out, although the topics that I have, as you know, I think I do have a lot to talk about, so we will be going through those. Let's see who's in the chat today. We've got, just starting, you can't see just at the top of the screen up there, we've got Shubus, just to make sure you're not late, checking in real early, which he indeed did. Rainbow, oi, indeed, good to have you in here. We've got Erin, yay, you made it. Yay, all of us, great to have you. We've got December Clouds, and you, yes, indeed. Dan H, people, I will not be triggered by all of these butter-related puns and innuendo and so on. I am cool. We actually have decent butter at the moment. I've been enjoying practically an oversupply. Actually, it's been good. I commend the commissars on their, I mean, of course there is. They've actually overcompensated and they're giving away free milk at the moment. So we're doing okay. But yeah, Quentin Rankid, great to have you in as almost every week. Great to see you once again. We've got Odie Jr. Boom, on time. In fact, it was so on time today that you're ready and waiting for the show to start yesterday. That is wow, is that like time daylight saving or something? I mean, that'd be kind of cool if they changed the dateline for daylight saving. I would love to have Americans basically be in the same date thing. That would save me a lot of trouble with work. Great to have you here as always, Odie Jr. One Johnson, wave, right back at you. Shubus, it's yabba dabba time. Yeah, it was, but my camera wasn't working. Sorry about that. Hey, Devoid, good morning, Arizona. Good to have you in here. Good to see everybody saying hello to each other as well. Always very nice to see. Who else we got in here? We've got making sure I've got my place and I'm not missing anybody. Eric Bailey, good to see you indeed. I have been waiting for you. Thank you. I can tell the camera was like, yeah, you can't click on the start button. Eric Bailey isn't here yet, and that was pretty much the whole thing. So yeah, good job. Andrea Moboy, good to have you in here. I know it's late for you. I do appreciate it. Good to see you. Who else we got in here? Andrew Moboy, Tokyo 503, let's start. Yes, indeed. And indeed, Dan H, as a veteran of the show, of course, wouldn't be my stream if there were no technical issues or starting late. I was on time. I was good. I was about to click like start. It was even buffered and everything, and then I realized the video wasn't working. So yeah, the good old sturdy Microsoft Live Cam. I mean, this thing is a tank, and not the type of with proper armor that works, and I will not run away from. Yes, Andrea Mobo definitely checking butter stocks at the moment. Yeah, well, I think butter is a solid investment at the moment. They're doing well, although it can be a fickle market, particularly in completely state-controlled run systems. But yes, Lysander 45, good to see you as always. Andrea Moboy, I'm sorry. I hope Yeah, I hope this was sufficiently long ago that your yawn was. Believe me, it gets better. It gets better. Okay, just hold on. It is Yabba Dabba. Shubba's holding on to Yabba Dabba do for a long time. They got Odie Jr. Boom, 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 boom. If you've seen Blackadder Goes Forth, maybe if you've seen British TV, Blackadder is one of the best TV series ever to come out of the UK, actually. It's like a history setting, but there's, one of the characters, Baldrick, who plays a not very intelligent private. He decides to get into the war poetry thing. A lot of the soldiers in World War I in the trenches are writing famous poetry, so he thought he would get into it, but he doesn't have very much vocabulary, so his poem was boom, 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 boom. It just goes on for a long time with lots of booms, but it's pretty much, I think you could be quoting him, Odie Jr., so good stuff. John Carlo Lanoy, good to see. Philippine representative, great to have you in here. Our Florida representative, Sadiq Hakanguris, great to have you in here. Our Turkish man from Florida. And everybody else in here. We've got Sergeant Bilko, as always. Erin, would love to hear my thoughts on USB in general, USB-C in general. Don't know if you're throwing me a squirrel thing there. But, yeah, USB. I love C. I mean, I appreciate it. I recently got some new work laptops that use USB-C, and just the fact in one tiny port that you can use power supply and plug in like a bazillion things. And of course, the other thing about USB-C is that all of the latest mics and the 4K webcams and everything take advantage of the extra bandwidth that you get from it. So yeah, this is actually USB-C is the main thing making me want to upgrade my PC right now, because my current PC has USB 3 ports, but they're kind of iffy. They're built on my PC was put together before USB 3 was standardized, which means that even when I buy USB 3 peripherals, like I got a Blackmagic video capture card, for example, but it didn't work with the USB 3 thing. They had different standards in those days, whereas USB-C is better than all of that. And everything works with it. So I can't upgrade a lot of my setup. I can't get a nice fancy latest webcam because I'm not sure it's going to work, and I don't want to waste the money. So I'm really glad that USB-C exists, at least that, there's these USB stuff, which, and with my laptop at work in particular, just the fact that I can connect my laptop and like 3 or 4 monitors just through a single USB-C port, I'm a big fan of it. I'm not a big fan of the fact that it's a new shaped plug, but you know what, given that it's a better standard, I'll be willing to cut everything over. So yeah, I'm a fan. Thank you for asking. I can chase squirrels all day long. Thank you, Aaron. Dan H. Japan says it must look after its own before allowing in Syrian refugees. Did it really say that? Or Japanese firms and individuals line up to help arriving Ukrainian refugees. I don't think Japan ever uses, well, I've never heard it use the line that it has its own people in Syrian refugee level poverty to look after first. I think, honestly, with Japan, I mean, don't forget, it wasn't just Japan that was nervous about Syrian refugees. This was the case in Europe as well. There were people afraid that they might be letting in ISIS people. There were people, I mean, it was racism. It was just straight up racism. But it was sort of like, yeah, that's a terrible problem. They're going to have to take care of that kind of a thing. And a bit nervous that people coming from this war zone with all of these sort of militia groups and so on, how to screen people and so on. That was the justification in Japan. I mean, the real justification was racism and just general fear of, in general, of who you might let in as refugees, and just thinking, ooh, why would we want all of those dirty third world refugees coming here? And, Ukraine is no different. Ukrainian refugees are absolutely no different to Syrian refugees or Democratic Republic of Congo refugees or Central African Republic refugees or Myanmar refugees. But yeah, no question, I think racism plays a huge part in it, and the fact that Japanese love Europe and they see Ukraine as being like a part of sort of Western Europe. I mean, they look similar and so on, and they do have some linked culture and so on, but there's no justification for the difference. I agree. There's absolutely a double standard, and it's not just Japan. It's everywhere is looking at this differently, but certainly the way that Japan. I think the other part of it, by the way, and I will get into this in the topics today in more detail, but there is certainly also a bit of theater where Japan is looking to, Japan, like with the Gulf War, with the original Gulf War, when Japan just said it would fund troops, assuming that everyone was okay with the idea of Japan being pacifist and the idea that it would just contribute funding to the Western Alliance to liberate Kuwait. And it got, really diplomatically beaten up over it, like they were sort of cowards and not pulling their weight properly and just thinking they could buy everyone off to avoid their responsibility, which I thought was pretty harsh on Japan at the time. But Japan was deeply scarred by the backlash against its huge financial contributions to the Western military alliance to defend Kuwait, to liberate Kuwait. So I think it's very conscious. If something looks important to America and to NATO and to European countries that Japan sort of whose opinion it values, Japan will make a performance out of showing solidarity. And that's definitely a big part of what's happening here. It's not just Japan looking. I mean, certainly there's a part of it where Japanese look at Ukrainians and just think, oh, those poor blonde-haired, blue-eyed, model-like women that we must rescue. I mean, that's literally what some of the boards and internet stuff is. I mean, it's are sort of looking at, and it's kind of disgusting and horrible, frankly, like that sort of angle. But yeah, it's absolutely no different to the Syrian refugees. And you look at Syrians. I mean, Steve Jobs was from Syrian heritage. If you met someone who had Syrian parents, you wouldn't know them from coming from Wales or anything else. So it's weird. It's weird. I do agree with you. I don't think, but yeah. Anyway. I will not be triggered. No, not easily anyway. Well, not very easily. Maybe slightly easily. Yeah, I guess I probably will come think of it. Okay, I'll be triggered. I'll be honest. That's what I'm here for. I'm gonna be triggered. We all have our therapy. Odie Jr., I am the Buttersar indeed. Yes, Nick, top of the evening, East Coast US. Wow, great to have you here. Thank you for recognizing. Top of the morning, of course, in the East Coast US. Great to have you in here, Nick. Andrea Mowbray, 11:40 p.m. in Melbourne. Finally. Has daylight savings now changed? I must admit, I've totally changed my opinion on even 10 years into living in Japan. I thought Japan was stupid not having daylight saving, but particularly, I mean, apart from between live streaming and working with people in multiple other time zones in both the southern hemisphere and the northern hemisphere at the same time, yeah, I form the opinion that being somewhere with daylight saving, particularly having to deal with people in Australia and Europe and America at the same time, I feel like Japan is the only responsible one that doesn't shift the clocks around. Very glad that we're in a better time zone for you now, Andrea. By Hagon Faxon. Not sure I pronounced that correctly, but hey, from Canada, nice to have a Canadian in here. Good to have you with us. I'm sure I mispronounced that. School holidays just started in Melbourne. They just ended here in Japan. The new school year just started here, but I heard about that. Actually, I heard from my mum today how, like, at the airports, how with all the travel restrictions and everything lifted, like at least in Queensland, all the airports are in complete chaos because they can't handle all the crowds of people going to travel. Ian Macaulay, good to see you. Ian Macaulay, good to have you in here. We've got Shubis, we've got jumped ahead there a moment, but believe in yourself, good to have you in here. Do I have room for an adding card? I'm sure I do. I don't know what that is, but yes. Vince back, hi, good to see you. Not that much to say. Hey, good to see you. And I think I'm caught up now, almost caught up. Message retracted by Dan H. Aaron, thumbs up. Slap the like button indeed. I don't remember to say it every week, but literally, as you all know, the only thing I'm doing this for, I switched off all the ads. I'm purely doing this for praise and attention and likes. And subscribes are nice. Honestly, my subscription account hasn't changed in like 10 years, so that's cool. But likes, if you enjoy, if you appreciate me, if you missed me last week, even if you didn't, honestly, I would appreciate people watching. If you enjoy what I do, click a like on the like button. That is always appreciated. And with all of that said, it's 10:51. Let's dive into the topics. Enough of the jib jabber. So yeah, reverse order. So we're going back more than a week for this story. There wasn't a lot last week, but in fact, okay, before I go in, I will look at this. Dan H has a quote: "Japan must improve the living standards of its own people before it can consider accepting Syrian refugees." The Prime Minister, Abe said that on 29th of September 2015. That strikes me as the kind of thing that Abe says when he's not Prime Minister. I mean, Abe said a lot of screwed up stuff. Like, for example, I remember watching a TV show where they were talking about the need for immigration to, rectify Japan's demographic challenge. And he said, "No, I don't believe that we need foreigners. I think we can manage through this whole thing, just keeping it all Japanese." Now, to his credit, Abe expressed an opinion that he doesn't want any immigration literally, and it would be better to let Japan demographically collapse than it would be to let in immigrants. But that said, while he was prime minister, Japan opened up and accepted the most immigrants that it's ever entered, and it dramatically, radically liberalized how easy it is to get into Japan and live. Which is to say, what I respect about Abe, I don't like Abe, but what I respect about him is that while he clearly has a lot of Fruit Loop personal opinions, including the desire to be like, hell, he wants to be flying bombers directly into Ukraine. That's what he wants to remilitarize and everything. He probably wants to even join NATO. He's even talking about having nukes at the moment. So, he's not the most liberal person in the world, but that said, he had the longest tenure of a prime minister, like post-war, had 2 terms, had a supermajority during a period where he could have changed the constitution if he had decided to really force it through, and everything that he wanted to do. He could have remilitarized the country, he could have had nukes, could have done anything. He could have banned immigration. And he didn't do any of those things. He was pragmatic. He did what Japanese governments do, which is that they defer to the pretty well-educated and informed. We rag on the Japanese government all day. But in the end of the day, they're more qualified, at least, than the politicians on many matters of policy. And I'm glad that things like immigration are not, kicked around like populist political footballs like they are in many European countries and other countries. So at the end of the day, he says screwed up things about immigration, but very quietly in the background, he was doing the opposite. And that was not on his own volition. That was under advice. But he respected the advice that he was given. And that's the thing. He's a career, he's an aristocratic politician, basically. And he's learned that, if you turn on the bureaucrats in Japan and you try to take over their jobs, you're dead. And that's what happened with Hatoyama. That's what happened with Ozawa, whose whole mission is to do that. Abe knows that you can't govern unless you let the bureaucrats get their way. So he expresses an opinion, but he doesn't ram it through. And I think with refugees, well, you could say he got his way on refugees, but his personal opinion was already aligned with the policy at the time of only accepting like 20 refugees per year. But I think that's obviously, like many other stupid things that Abe says and thinks and believes, that's patently ridiculous that Japan has its own people just as bad off as Syrian refugees, or people actually like in situations equivalent, even comparable. The only people who might claim to be in comparable situations to the Syrian refugees are maybe the Okinawans who live beside American military bases, who Abe does not give a crap about. And Okinawa, remember, the worst economically off prefecture in Japan, and completely abused and ignored by Abe, like with all the base stuff and so on. But nothing comparable, obviously, to the situation with Syria. So that's an offensive statement. I didn't realize he actually said that, but wow, what a stupid thing to say. But again, thank heavens, he very seldom actually translated his own stupid thoughts into policy, and that was what was good about him. But yes, interesting. Thank you for the quote, Dan H. I will now dive into the first topic of the night. Hey, it's only 10:55. We've got 35 minutes left. We'll be fine. First topic, boom. Representative Shiomura Ayaka pushes against teenage pornography. Colleagues laugh. I've talked multiple times about the problems with Japan, just in general, having a low representation of women in all areas of the economy, politics, and so on. But in particular, in political representation, Japan ranks about 165 out of 195 countries. It's at a level that the Taliban reached out and said, hey, Japan, I think we can be friends. And it's not far off. I did think out loud, hey, did they see Japan's gender equality rankings and think they could find some common ground? It's that bad. In Parliament, it's different in the upper and lower houses, and I can't remember which is the better one. One house has 23% representation of women, one is 10% representation of women. But again, when you have a lawmaking body that legislates for the entire populace of Japan, and it's 90% men and 10% women, you'll have a lot of situations of men placed in situations where they are in charge of legislating to protect or to improve the welfare of 50% of the population that is biologically born genetically female. And they have no, even people who intend well and intend to empathize and represent, it still is entirely different it's like me trying to represent, people from Paraguay or whatever. I can read Wikipedia. I can maybe meet a few and listen to what they think is important. But in the end of the day, you have to sort of be from there to really understand. And with women, understanding all the challenges from an internal perspective. It just means, what it means is that the gender imbalance and representation anywhere, and it's a similar problem in other countries which have electoral systems that favor one person winning entirely, like first past the post systems like the United States has. When you have a gender imbalance in political representatives, it results in laws that just are bad for women. It means people, basically legislating in ways that are on issues that they don't understand with outcomes that they don't understand. It just results in bad laws at a minimum, and that's what offends me. It's not, I don't consider myself a feminist at all, but to me, it just offends me that, if you have 90% of people who have no idea what it's like to be a woman legislating for matters that can be life or death for women. And this is a perfect example. When a woman representative in Parliament wanted a priority that, for example, when they lowered the age of majority in Japan from 20 to 18, among all the debate around, the consequences of lowering the age of majority, where people, for example, 18-year-olds will be criminally responsible. They will be now responsible as adults, where they weren't responsible until they were 20 before. You could murder someone and you would end up in juvie and your identity would be protected, and you could be out back in public at 25. Now at 18, you're straight to real adult prison. You're now accountable for making contracts. Now, this is the norm in most countries. But what was interesting about Japan was that when they lowered the age of majority, they thought that for alcohol and cigarettes, those things are far too dangerous, and people who are 18 or 19 are still far too vulnerable to be able to they might fall victim to the vices, for example, of they might be taken advantage of by the chemical producing companies that make alcohol and cigarettes. So they decided to keep those at the age of 20. Yet at the same time, it was pointed out that an industry like the pornography industry, which many parts of which prey on women, particularly with contracts and so on, was likely to take advantage and target vulnerable people, and basically be able to lower the age of people able to participate in pornography and target more vulnerable people who will be less aware of their rights and so on, and suggested that maybe, like we were concerned about the welfare of people with the drinking age, we should be putting in special measures to protect vulnerable people from being taken advantage of by Japan's enormous pornography industry. And as she was talking about the need to protect vulnerable people from abuse by Japan's pornography industry, there were people chuckling in Parliament. They were laughing. And you know what they were laughing at? They were thinking, wow, this is great. Now we can have 18-year-olds in our porn. And that was literally the laugh. And that's what happens when you have a house of legislators who are 90% men. You're going to have 2 or 3 who are just morons, and and are going to signal to the rest that it's kind of okay to chuckle and the flow will go over, and you have a lawmaker there saying, no, this is not something you should laugh about. This is people, this is actual abuse of people. But they can't relate to it, right? Because they're dudes. They watch pornography. They think it's something awesome that women do for them. And again, how can you ensure that you have the laws that the nation needs? And this is where, the Mainichi Shimbun editorial board said a few weeks ago, Mainichi is not far left or anything. They're very centrist. And they said, there should be gender quotas on representatives because, while everybody's pledged to have more women in Parliament, the parties have failed on this woefully. Opposition parties and government parties, most of them only have about 10% representatives. And while, yes, for people in America, you might say, well, it's up to the people who they choose to be representative. And that is true where you have seats that have elected representatives. But in Japan, half the seats are filled by party lists. And what a lot of Scandinavian countries and other countries that use gender quotas to ensure balanced representation in Parliament is that they have quotas to ensure that those party lists are required to have certain gender makeup. And in the end of the day, that a party list is basically the people who get put in to fill the seats that are apportioned to parties by the party vote. And again, most parties, even their party lists, they don't put any women in there. And so and sure, while there are advantages of experience and so on, and willingness to do the job and all that sort of thing, and we might be filling these seats with less experienced people. I mean, how much experience do men have with problems relating to fertility, or problems relating to the thing that's come up lately on sort of women's hygiene poverty, the extra money that women have to pay, and the way that taxes are applied differently to women's sanitary products. Fertility, child raising, again, which in Japan is overwhelmingly assumed, the burden is assumed to be borne by women. And in Parliament, stuff like this, stuff to protect vulnerable women, from clearly men, even in Parliament, think that women are things to be preyed upon and that this is awesome, and they laugh at it. So, obviously pretty disgusting, but another good example, actually, of why it's not feminist at all to seek increased gender representation. It's just like good common sense and good lawmaking. So that's the first topic anyway, and a pretty unfortunate episode from the Japanese Parliament. Quick look at the comments. I see that Gabriel Million is in there. And I agree with you that they need more females in Japanese Parliament. No one's directed a comment at me. Remember, if you've got a comment that you want me to respond to, or just a comment that you want to make to draw my attention, just say Hiko Simon. You don't even have to put an @ mark on the front. It will flash orange. You'll see it over there. However, I will not read every single comment. I'll just look for the ones that are aimed at me, and there are none at the moment, so I'm going to move to the next topic. And the next topic is we're dealing with BA Baracus at the moment. It's BA2, I think is what it's called. It's basically now taken over from the Omicron. I mean, it is a form of Omicron, apparently. I can't keep up anymore, honestly. They're like Rocky sequels, but, Clubber Lang, BA from the 18. Whenever I hear the BA2, I feel like it's a sequel to the 18 with Mr. T. Very Gen X 1980s reference there. And if you don't get it, believe me, you're probably doing better in life than I am. But BA2 is now replacing it. Is more virulent, it is more contagious, and people end up more hospitalized by it. So it's a little bit scary. And as a result, partly of that and partly of the fact that we just ended all of the restrictions that we had from the last wave. I think that was the 5th wave. So now we're talking about the 6th wave possibly starting. Between the 6th wave, the 5th wave restrictions ending, and everyone's saying more or less, yeah, it's okay to party now, but don't go too crazy. But of course, we just had the end of the school year, fiscal year. So of course, we've had all the end of year parties. Now we're having all the new year parties and people starting schools. And we've just had all the Hanami parties. And, generally the stats say it takes 2 weeks for that sort of shock of that to hit. Most of the Hanami parties took place about 2 weeks from now. So 2 weeks ago from now. So we are starting to see what's happening in the numbers is where the highest we ever had before was like 5,000 cases per day in Tokyo. It got up to like 20,000, 30,000. Now it's come down to 8,000, but it's just like leveled out. The week over week change today was like 99.2%. So it's down like 0.8%. But it looks like it might be about to go up again. Like it hasn't really come all the way down. And even though we've taken off these sort of restrictions, including more and more foreigners can now enter Japan, which is a good thing. So even the travel restrictions and everything's coming off. This is partly due to the fact that, again, being less virulent than Delta and the previous strains, there are less people. The medical system is not as strained as it was. So, from that perspective, it's still seen as manageable, even if there are more cases. But looking at New Zealand, for example, New Zealand has more daily cases than Tokyo does, even though it only has, a seventh of the population. So, a lot of countries, Hong Kong as well, doing terribly. I mean, again, a lot of countries that have done well for a long time, just keeping completely isolated and shutting out, and now just sort of dealing with it. I still think Japan has been a good place to be through all of this. It's kind of been locked down, but it's been locked down. It's been like, please, would you mind just locking down? If you have an emergency, you can go into work. You can travel more than 5 kilometers from your home. No one's going to get arrested. Some restaurants, I think, did get threatened with fines and so on. I got corrected on that on the internet, and that was correct. But generally speaking, it's been a please cooperate kind of a thing, and it's been kind of a lockdown, but not a lockdown. And I think it's been fairly easygoing. And I think the good thing about that is that because it's not the government like punching people in the face and threatening to arrest them to comply, making people feel like just they want to rebel intuitively. And this thing in America, how people talking about all these articles coming out like, I never want to be forced to wear a mask again. We've never been forced to wear masks here in Japan. We just do it because it's smart. And I'm so glad to live in a country where we don't need public officials to oppress us, telling us to do it. We just recognize it's kind of natural. And even with the Mamba off, everyone I see outside wears masks. It's totally normal. Honestly, it's literally like wearing underwear in your face, but in a socially acceptable way, in the sense that not wearing them or having your nose hang out it would be as weird as doing the same thing with underwear, frankly. I feel naked without it, and I don't feel any burden from it. Honestly, I've kind of gotten used to it. It is funny that there used to be all this debate about hijabs. And so on, and the idea that there was a debate where literally the point was in a lot of that, like France, for example, you shouldn't be able to cover up your identity in public, and people just sort of freaked out by masks a lot. But that debate's just kind of gone away. It turns out the hijabs were right all along. Maybe one up for the Muslims. Maybe they were onto something. Maybe they figured this out first. But I'm pretty used to it now anyway. So and I think because of all of that, Japan's just kind of chugged along. It's never been good. It's never been excessively bad. Although it's gotten pretty bad, and it looks like it's going to get bad again. But I do get the sense like it's kind of going into a thing where it's moving towards being endemic. I mean, maybe it's already been endemic for a while, but it's getting to at least a state where you don't need to shut everything down, and where everyone who gets it, the death rates are going to come down. I mean, that's the hope. Hopefully these strains will become less virulent. But again, if anything, in the last 2 years, I mean, man, if you'd told us that we'd still be dealing with all of this 2.5 years ago, I guess 2.5 is too much, but 2 years and 3 months ago or whatever, it's pretty crazy. I think we've learned that just when we think we're out, it pulls us back in. So, yeah, I'm not partying naked in the street at the moment, but I am hopeful that we'll be back to traveling, and that you'll all be able to come to Japan. If you're not in Japan right now, we'll be able to do that soon. So just hold on. But yeah, at the moment, it's kind of just leveling out, and I get the feeling we're going to have another bit of a bump up. So we'll see how that goes. Into the comments, Odie Jr., what is your best career? Korea, I should say. What is my best career? I see up top, you did distract me. I did notice your comment. If North Korea is being referred to as best career, if so, I object. I don't know that North Korea can really be called best career in any sort of a sense. I hope they will get back together one day. I like South Korea. I like the North Korean restaurant I visited in Dalian when I was in China. The North Koreans that I met there and talked to were very nice people, and the food was excellent. Even the beer, even North Korean beer was okay. It was decent. I would drink it again. I do hope that North Korea does join the rest of us, and that Korea can become like Germany one day and reunify. But I'd say for now, there isn't really much of a contest, unless there's a Korea no one's told me about out there. I'd say there's only really one. Andrea, have a good night. Glad that you could join us. Ilrak, great to have Ilrak 299. Excellent to have you with us. Quint Ranked, if hijabs are a good idea, why don't men wear them? Well, we are now. So, like I said, I think maybe the people wearing the hijabs were onto something. That's my conclusion. So yeah. Atomic Tom. Yeah, why not? Sainted Sir, hello, great to have you in here. Eric Bailey, guess your last one was blocked. Sorry if I missed something. You were just suggesting watching some of Nobita from Japan vids. I've seen some of Nobita from Japan's vids, and I've decided not to watch any more of them, but yes. About the topic, a lot of girls are forced into their first vid. Oh, you mean the adult industry? Well, like I say, it's well known that industry. I mean, look, everywhere, the porn industry everywhere is a mix of, I mean, I'm sure that there are people in that industry who willingly and knowingly and, as an adult make a conscious decision, knowing all the consequences to go in and do it. But it's pretty clear. You take the most famous, again, maybe showing my Gen X roots at the moment, but you take the most famous, probably, adult movie actress of the 1990s and early 2000s, was Ijima Ai, for example. And yet, she eventually published her book. She spent, when she became a mainstream TV celebrity, based on being an adult movie celebrity, she basically spent her entire income on getting like every video of her like taken down from the internet. And she wrote a book which made it clear that, even someone who willingly made herself like a poster child for the healthy, willing, happy, adult movie industry person who, had lots of fans, and I was a fan, but she made a book which said, yeah, she was totally abused and kind of forced into it, and and regretted the whole thing. So yeah, like it's a pretty dark world, right? Absolutely, Eric Bailey. Nobita in Japan is a I mean, well, Nob by name, Nob by nature. He's just made some just such stupid videos in the past. I would not watch a video of his again, and I wouldn't recommend anybody watch his channel. He's kind of racist. He's kind of said some outrageous, just stupid things a few times. Although, I mean, he's allowed to have his opinion. He's allowed to have a YouTube channel, and I'm allowed to say, don't watch that guy. I'm not saying cancel him, honestly. I'm sure his mum watches his videos, but not into it. Quinn Rankid, best Korea is an ironic, sarcastic way of referring to the place that is clearly worst. Oh, I see. I'd like to know what's third place Korea. I don't know. I mean, countries, right? Speaking of countries, let's get into the third story that we have. Also Russia, terrifying Russia. So, I always used to joke how the peace negotiations that have been going on with Russia for 80 years were always stuck, whereby the always dodgy ads around these articles. You can't really ever properly cover them all up. It's always been a negotiation where Japan's been negotiating to get return of the 4 Northern Territory islands that, so that the original inhabitants can return to their homes, and where Russia sees them as negotiations for them promising to not take the rest of Hokkaido as kind of a joke. But that's literally a representative in the Russian parliament, no doubt from one of the oblasts where vodka is particularly cheap. Got up in Parliament and said, listen, there are some scientific views that even Hokkaido could be seen as legitimately part of Russia. And, we should stick it to those Japanese that are being mean to us, joining in the sanctions and saying that we're bad people, when, of course, everything bad happening in Ukraine at the moment is clearly Ukrainians doing it to themselves, and just whatnot ridiculousness. And literally, he threatened, suggested, hey, fellas, why don't we invade Hokkaido? Now, fortunately, the Russian parliament did not vote then and there to go and invade Hokkaido. They are in their high-tech, impressive Russian military way, holding exercises right now on the islands that Japan claims just off Hokkaido, driving rusty trucks around. Literally, they put trucks on a barge and paraded just off the Japanese coast. Like, that was intimidating. The Japanese are looking, kind of laughing at them a little bit. And now they're doing missile drills, just to show how strong and impressive they are. And like I say, what a country. What a country. Dad, you're drunk, go back to sleep. Japan doesn't care. Japan, if you want to know how Japan is reacting to Russia, like acting like angry bear at the moment, look at how Japan's dealt with North Korea. North Korea's literally fired rockets over Japan, has literally kidnapped citizens and done all sorts of stuff. Whoa, 10%. I think I'll make it 15 minutes. And yet, for all of that, Japan has learned the best way the way that you deal with a gangster in Japan, a gangster who's trying to mad dog you and hook you in so that you have to pay them stuff. The way to deal with gangsters is that you never deal with them. You never put yourself in a situation that you have to deal with them. If a country acts crazy and they're trying to intimidate you, you don't stand up to the bully and fight them, and you don't have to run away or anything. You just ignore them. Just treat them like they're irrelevant. And that's what Japan's always done with Russia. It certainly is what they've done very well with North Korea, where North Korea has been deliberately, kind of saying, fight me, bro, for years. And Japan's just it's like a yapping, irrelevant chihuahua. That's how Japan treats North Korea. Occasionally they say, hey, you ready to actually act like a normal country and give us our abducted citizens back yet? And they go, no, screw you, man. And then Japan just goes back to ignoring them. And that's what Japan will do with Russia. Russia can do all the crazy stuff that they like. In the end of the day, they're the ones that still have no warm water seaport in the Pacific Ocean. and can basically only get through a small channel to get out into the Pacific Ocean from at least north of Japan. And Japan is American military bases at every other choke point that the Russian Navy needs to get out to have any kind of influence in the Pacific. So in the end of the day, Russia's kind of like tied up and can't do anything out here. That's why they're not going to give those islands back. And, Mr. Drunk, angry person that's invaded Hokkaido, again, looking at how the Russian military really doesn't look that intimidating right now. So, anyway. 3 good videos. Oh, comments first. Although I see no comments here. Eric Bailey, it sounds like... It sounds like people have, yes, if you want to see a real knob on the internet, I mean, that's what you should call this channel. Go check out Nobita's channel. Don't tell him I said I don't want to. I want to do the Japan thing with this. Even calling out his name was technically a mistake, like by the Japan strategy. So, good luck to him anyway. But yes, and indeed, thank you, Aaron. I'm glad you appreciated my simile of an angry Chihuahua. I recommended some good videos yesterday from YouTube. 3. First one at the top is talking about the time when Sony deliberately installed malware on their music CDs so that if anybody put music CDs into their PCs to listen to the music, or of course, as was happening wildly in the late 1990s, to rip them into MP3s or create digital copies, it would install malware on your PC that could break your PC and CD drive. And they did this with a couple of CDs, and they ended up with a class action lawsuit. And this is just part of the story. I've told my opinion of where Sony went wrong many times, but for me, Sony went from being this hero company, literally a hero company that invented the twin cassette deck, and when music companies sued it because they thought that they had created a device that was purely for the purpose of copying music, allowing people to dub cassette tapes, they went and they stood up for consumers' rights to be able to dub personal copies of their own music, and they won. They got into these media lawsuits against the big US media companies, and they won. And then when they released a VHS, which you could record, beta, I should say, a video cassette recorder that you could record TV shows on, same thing. The media industry lost its shit. They sued Sony, and Sony, which was making the recording devices, stood up for the consumers and said, "Hey, be cool, bro. People should be able to record stuff. They should be able to watch whenever they want." So, they did that. And when Sony originally bought U.S. media companies, they did it for the purpose of influencing media companies to not sue, hardware manufacturers like themselves. And what happened was they basically got sort of infected. And they became convinced that they should stop being hardware manufacturers because China is going to take all of that over, and so is Korea and so on, which is kind of true. And instead, they should focus on, if they want to stay a big, powerful, influential company, they should pivot to actually being a primarily media company. And in order to do that, they made Howard Stringer CEO, and they became a primarily media-focused company. And when they did that, they started basically having the media divisions, having the lawyers that they were fighting against, start to tell them how they should make their. Apart from the fact they did 2 things. One, they had their. They used to be literally the Apple, the sort of, the high quality, reliable, everybody trusts sort of hardware, the Walkman, all the music devices and stuff. They bought Aiwa, they bought a cheap Chinese, low quality home appliance manufacturer, and they said that they would shift all of their manufacturing to China to save money and remain competitive, which resulted in their stuff just becoming more easily broken and crappy quality. And then they let the music company lawyers get into their hardware divisions, and they did 2 things. One, the best music format of all time, the mini disc. It was the most wonderful musical format. The lawyers from the entertainment parts of Sony said, yeah, if you allow like easy digital copying on a little easily writable media disc, basically like a CD-ROM that you can just rewrite, multiple times and use like a floppy disk kind of a thing for music, which would be convenient and easy to make perfect digital copies. Well, that's going to create legal problems that people are going to have, too easily well copied, perfect digital copies of music. So we're going to make it so that whenever you copy the music, we want you to put extra code in to degrade the music slightly every time, like a cassette tape would, so that people are not are not creating copies that are just as good as the purchased copies. So they deliberately sabotaged the quality of mini discs to appease the music lawyers. And the other thing that they did was this: they actually, for a time, actually installed malware and devices that would hide on the operating system, and would actually break the hardware of computers. Without basically informing consumers that they were doing this. They would install these things. And there was a time when you bought Sony Music, and everyone was ripping them into MP3s. You had to draw a black marker pen around the edge of the CD, or else it would install this malware on your computer, and it could break your CD drive if you put it in, even if it was just to play to listen to the music. And there was a class action lawsuit, and they lost. And it was just, it's when Sony really sucked. And they're starting to come back now, and they're coming back as a media company, and they are better. But they just became from a consumer champion to an anti-customer company, and they really lost me at that time anyway. That was very disappointing. Second video down here, and this will start playing if I put that there, so I will go back here, is a video actually on the Northern Territories dispute, which I just talked about just now. There are tons of explainers about the history of how Russia ended up with these 4 islands and why Japan thinks it's their islands and so on. This is the best explainer video I've ever seen on it. And what I liked about it was it's not only all the things that I already knew and that I've read a million times and I talk about on the show a million times, they pointed out something actually which was really cool. You can see I can't really zoom in on that, but Sakhalin Island, that's actually, leaning towards Russia, the big island on top of Japan. That island actually, Japan and Russia agreed to split that island between each other. And they were both managing it, basically. Japan managed the southern half of that island and, owned it as regular part of Japan. It was called Karafuto. I've met people who were born, or their parents were born on Sakhalin Island. It was fully Japanese as Hokkaido. And there were hundreds of thousands of Japanese who lived on Sakhalin at that time. As you all know, the story about, Japan was debating before World War II whether it was going to go and seek more living space and territory in Manchuria and move north and towards Russia and confront Russia, or if it was going to go south. And the U.S. oil embargo in 1941 kind of, many from the Japanese side would say that forced their hand. That when they had oil cut off from America, the only real choice that they had at that time was to go for they had to find their own source of oil that they could grab, and the only source of oil that they knew that was within reach, that was really achievable for them, was Indonesia. So they decided to give up on attacking Russia. They focused on moving south, and in order to go through the Philippines to get to Indonesia, they realized they had to neutralize America, so they attacked Pearl Harbor. So they attacked Pearl Harbor essentially because of the oil sanctions, and basically they realized that America would stop them going and taking over Indonesia and grabbing Indonesia's oil. However, what they didn't know was that on Sakhalin Island, which they already had, Sakhalin Island has 5 times the oil reserves of Indonesia. Sakhalin Island in the 1990s, they discovered oil there. Some of the biggest oil reserves in the world, like Saudi Arabia level, freaking oil reserves, were in Sakhalin underneath their feet the whole time, but no one discovered the oil there until 1990. So even right now, with the sanctions and so on with Russia, Japan's actually invested and is jointly developing a lot of those resources there, because that's a great source of energy for Japan. I mean, if Japan had known that it had within its territory Saudi Arabia-style oil stocks, it might not have agreed to give up Sakhalin, and it might not have even attacked America. It's fascinating. But, what's happening here? Oops. You know what? 7%. I'm going to make it. I'm going to turn off the battery saving thing if I can find it. I can't find it. Meh. Okay, we'll just keep going. So yeah, that was a thing that happened. Look, I haven't owned a car since I was 21, but I love Japanese cars growing up, and I still like watching car channels. And the Donut Media channel, which just talks about cars, particularly guys who love Japanese cars, it's just super entertaining, and I just watch it because I love the channel. Donut Media did their take on the Carlos Ghosn story. And again, it's wonderful. It's a telling of a story I've told myself and I've heard a million times. But they've got details in this account, in this video, which stuff which I just never fully appreciated. Just extra color around the edges. Like, for example, the ways that Ghosn saved money at Nissan, apart from cutting back the number of cars and simplifying supply chains. Apparently, he said, people among the many reasons people within Nissan were annoyed at Ghosn was the fact that he forced all of the cars, including the Skyline and all their famous high-performance cars, to use the same terrible transmission. Everybody knew it was terrible and was embarrassed at it. And he talked for a long time about those sort of things, about, okay, what's in the pro box for Gon and what's in the negative box for Gon. And it's actually, again, it's a really well researched and entertainingly presented account of the Gon story, including doing part of the narrative from inside an audio equipment box with a flashlight. It's actually very good. So highly recommend all three of these videos. They're all there, but basically Sony's rootkit, remember Sony's rootkit gift, is the first video. The second video is from Real Life Law, why Russia is fighting Japan over these islands. And the third one is from Donut Media, Nissan's Fugitive CEO. They're all out from this week, and they're good videos worth watching. Back into the comments. I still got a lot in here. TFM, I think you're right. It doesn't, he's got his mum. He's okay. We've got Joni Korkula. Good to have you in here in the chat. You're one of the lucky few who gets to go to Tokyo for the summer in June, August. Any tips on how to prepare for the unbearable Tokyo summer, or any cool places to visit in Tokyo and nearby? Tips, very important. The best tip for surviving the suffocating, horrible, miserable, horrible summer in Tokyo is not to come here, and to go somewhere else. And anywhere that you think would be better is not better. Tokyo is pretty much as good as it gets. The only thing you can really do is go for altitude. A lot of rich people in Tokyo own like holiday homes in Karuizawa in Nagano Prefecture, which is like up in the mountains where there's like no air to heat up. Even Hokkaido like gets crazy hot. Kyoto and Osaka, Tokyo was unbearable, but Kyoto and Osaka are worse. Kyushu is funny because it's actually hotter in Tokyo in summer, as you'd expect. It's further south, but in winter it's also colder and it snows there more, so it's actually worse. Tokyo has the best climate in Japan, but summer still just sucks. I have work friends. I mentioned I've been waiting for co-workers to come to Japan, and there's one who's actually coming in May, but I'm just like, I just realized today, oh yeah, so you're going to be landing in the rainy season, and then you'll come out of that into the miserable, it won't be good until October. And the best place to be, some cool places that I recommend to visit in Tokyo or nearby, are basically anywhere connected with air conditioning, either your apartment. Just going outside is just so miserable. If you can, Marunouchi is interesting because there's a lot of underground there now, which is air conditioned. That's what Singapore now does. But everywhere you go out, you're just going to be covered in sweat and miserable, and there's no escape. Even the water is like warm. It's like getting into a bath if you go to the beach. There's nowhere you can go other than the mountains. Good luck. But that said, welcome to Tokyo. It is awesome. Go out in the evening and sleep during the day, and prepare yourself for $300 power bills keeping the air conditioning going. You'll need that. It's just horrible. Iraq 299, yes, NDs were great. Yes, Quentin Rankin loving some irony. Yes, indeed. The thing about irony is that it can be so ironic. Quote from William Shatner from Airplane 2, where they fly a space shuttle onto the moon. That was kind of cool. Battery saving mode. More comments. Aaron, do I think everyone will drop a nuclear bomb in the next year? Where are we going to be April 2023? Who knows at this point? It's funny, I was actually watching a video from Answers with Joe channel today, where he's talking about the differences between being a millennial and Gen X. I've expressed before my opinion that I hate the whole label. Gen X and millennials and Gen Z, these are marketing labels which marketers use to define us, to sort of, herd us together and say that you're Gen X, so you must like Mountain Dew. And, and we believe it, and it's pseudoscience that we've all sort of accepted. I think it's much more relevant that I am fashionably losing my hair and middle-aged and entering a crisis than the fact I grew up saying red and believing I should be skateboarding and drinking Mountain Dew. But he came up with a good point, that he suggested that the reason Gen Xers are different to millennials this is a theory that he had that I totally disagree with, but I'll share it anyway, is that we lived during the Cold War believing that, the whole world was going to end in a nuclear inferno, and we didn't really believe that there was going to be a future. So any, mediocre future that's happened is basically a bonus. Whereas, millennials were raised believing that the future was going to be great. I'm going to plug in the power. And I'm going to... Oh, where's the power saving settings? They're buried in there. Damn it. Okay, forget about it. I'm plugging that in. Whereas millennials believe they were going to have this great, awesome future, and now the pandemic and now the threat of nuclear weapons is making them feel like, and the fact that, they're losing the ability to own homes and stuff like that. Like, they're angry that they're having this thing taken away from them. Whereas Gen X were always like, yeah, whatever, we don't care. We're Gen X. Give me some Mountain Dew. I'm going to skateboard. And somehow we're more chill with it. I don't agree with that, but I thought that was an interesting thing. Are we going to be nuked? It was an interesting thing that I remember doing political science in the mid-1990s, where I remember talking about this in a group once. Where we sort of talked about how, isn't it? I was of the optimistic view. I was of the Francis Fukuyama is a smart guy, and history has really ended school. Who said, isn't the world awesome now? We thought we were going to get nuked, and we're not going to get nuked. And I remember everybody in my tutorial who was mostly socialist-y liberal, American-style liberal. God, I hate that I've actually accepted the American definition of that word. We're saying, nobody seriously thought we were ever going to get nuked. Seriously, that was just a thing. And I was kind of like, really? I thought it was kind of serious, and I'm glad that that's not there anymore. But everyone was like, yeah, no, we shouldn't be triumphal. That was never going to happen anyway. I still don't think even Russia is crazy enough to use nukes. I hope that does not happen, but who knows? Where are we going to be in April 2023? I mean, at this point, I'm expecting some sort of meteor, or maybe a solar flare, which could trigger earthquakes and aliens that could bring... there'll be some other problem, I'm sure, but, I expect to be surprised anyway. Nuclear weapons, too predictable. I think that's too obvious. The plot twists lately are far ahead of our ability to protect. That's my take on that, Aaron. I hope we can do. I hope that does not happen. Iraq 299. I just love the subtitles. Japanese names come up with some really strange alternatives. To what? I'm sorry, I'm not following, but I'm sure that it's good. Saying grouse as well, Mr. Kordychev. Yes, my 1980s Aussie slang. That'll be grouse, my Victorian. Get the Sheila. It'll be grouse. It'd be a ripper. That's a real ripper. I'll tell you, this show has been a real ripper tonight. It's been totally grouse. Imagine being a New Zealander with 1980s Australian slang. I think I've told the story. One day I'll tell the story when there's a scene in Flight of the Conchords where a guy wakes up, where a New Zealander wakes up in Australia, and he's spent the night, he's woken up from a hazy night in an Australian woman's bed, with the Australian flag as the sheets. And I believe I caused somebody that trauma once when I was in New Zealand when I asked to stop taking the doona. Doona is like Australian slang for a duvet. Which, because my mum's Australian, I grew up at home, I would call it a doona, and apparently no one in New Zealand calls it that. I learned. And I caused a reaction exactly like Flight of the Conchords, which was kind of funny. Anyway, a few more topics. Let's keep plugging through. Someone spent the night with me, and they thought that I was like, dude, are you Australian? It was an awkward moment. I'm not Australian. I'm kind of half. What was this? Oh, come on. What was this? Oh, come on to... Oh, come on. Oh, yeah. This was... apparently they're handing this out at the Tokyo Immigration Bureau, a foreign resident manual helping you to avoid you get caught up in criminal activities so that you can have a peaceful and safe time in Japan. And they didn't have this when I first got to Japan, and I just think this life of crime that I've embarked in as an immigrant, it was inevitable, it was unavoidable, and this simple leaflet at the airport could have just saved me. Literally, they have something called the Foreign Resident Manual, where literally, how to not be a criminal, let us help you. Think of a crime, don't do it. I'm pretty sure that's what the interior says. I mean, this could have saved me so much trouble if I'd just known that I wasn't supposed to be a criminal this entire time. Literally handing this out at the Tokyo Metropolitan Government Office for Promotion of Citizen Safety. Yep, still trying from the Tokyo Regional Immigration Services Bureau. Thank you, immigration, for telling us not to be criminals. I would never have figured that out. That's the thing that happened. Um, Comments. Quentin Rankid. Putin was foolish enough to invade Ukraine. What makes you think he won't do it if he looks like he's losing it and wants to throw over the board game in a petulant fit? He might. He might. I mean, God. I mean, honestly, living in a country with large earthquakes, and dealing with the pandemic for the last 2 years, it's funny. Americans get so defensive about the A bombs. They think, don't blame us. We had to do it. Japan wouldn't surrender. This was the only way. And, people spend so much time wasting energy over that. When you come to Japan, people see the A bombings as sort of being like an earthquake. It's just something really terrible that happened. And, they neither feel guilty about like being responsible, like it's their fault that they brought this on themselves, nor do they feel angry at the Americans. It's like Americans are always worried about like blame about this sort of thing. But Japanese are just sort of like, well, listen, every city in Japan gets like decimated every 40 years. We're chill, stuff happens. That's how they sort of look at it. And I must admit, I've kind of absorbed that mentality. Look, maybe Putin's going to use nuclear weapons and, we'll deal with that just like we dealt with a magnitude 9.2 earthquake and like we've dealt with this pandemic and everything else. I really prefer that he not use them. I'm not going to bet money that he is or isn't. I mean, I would like to think that, Russia's had a lot of crazy leaders. And don't forget, Douglas MacArthur actually was fired because he wanted to use nukes on China. Any country in the world is capable of having. I mean, Stalin, for all the stuff that he did, he never did that. So, countries are capable of having crazy, stupid leaders who might do that sort of thing. But call me optimistic to the point of fatalism. I really hope that he doesn't, and if he does, I guess we'll deal with that when we get to it, is my sort of view. Quinn Rankid. Dan H. On a lighter note, Intelligence Squared did a debate about the best metropolitan city, NYC versus Tokyo versus Singapore. You want my take, since I've been to all three. In fairness, I've only been to NYC for 24 hours and I loved it. Like, it's one of my, for me, out into the world from New Zealand, the choice was always New York City or Tokyo, and I chose Tokyo. But, if I didn't speak Japanese, I would have gone to New York. So I still have a bit of an idealized vision of New York as being like the capital of the world and the most cosmopolitan place in the world, and I still see it that way. That said, I do love Tokyo, and Tokyo just works. I also love Singapore. Growing up in Singapore is what inspired me to learn Japanese and end up in Tokyo. I love all three, but obviously I chose to live where I am for a reason. I like Singapore, but I have a lot of friends who have lived in Singapore as expats for a long time, and they do point out that the place kind of does have limits, and it does kind of drive you nutty in time. Well, I think what I like about Tokyo is that it's the good mix. One way to look at all three cities is, in New York, you've got to deal with the chaos of extreme freedom, where everybody thinks that everything should be free, including garbage on the street, including swerving cars towards people who are crossing the road, and all limits on freedoms are only what basically the cops sort of put on you or whatever. Now, New York's reputation has improved a lot in the last 20 years. The murder rates, the criminality, all it's become a lot more pleasant, and people there, I think, have become a lot more chill than they used to be. But you've got the extreme freedom of New York, and that's what attracts people, this energy and this idea that you can do anything there and no one's going to bother you unless you actually break the law. Then you've got Singapore, which is the opposite extreme. It's a very, very nice but very friendly authoritarian. It's like if your mother-in-law had spy cameras and was also a Stalinist president. No, that actually it's better than that. It's not that bad. But basically they believe that they should be in control of all aspects of everybody's lives. And it's nice and it's clean and I like it, and the people are very nice, and it works in a weird way. I mean, if you're going to have an authoritarian state, you might as well make it as close to Singapore as possible. And I would live in Singapore. I wouldn't live in many other countries that lack democracy and freedom as much as Singapore, but I would live in Singapore. Tokyo is funny because it kind of sits in between in a nice way. Honestly, there's no real like government control or government telling you what to do for almost anything in Tokyo or Japan. There is this freedom, but people have the freedom of people in New York, but yet they act like of their own volition, like people in Singapore. They don't need threats of punishment to not litter. They just don't do it. Why would they litter? They don't need fines in Singapore, and they don't need police people chasing them in New York. They just don't do it. And so what I kind of like, that you get the best of sort of both worlds. You get the size, the scale, the economy, but you get all the sort of cleanliness and the orderliness and the friendliness and the safety of Singapore, and at the same time you do have the freedom, if you want it, the same freedoms that you get in New York. A lot of people disagree with that, by the way, and I know that, and I know New York the least, but that's what I like about Tokyo, is I think it's and everything here is a cultural experience. I think New York has that as well, and to me, New York is a very appealing place. I would really like to go, but that's my take on the three. It's a good question. Thank you for asking. More questions. I love questions. I'm gonna keep taking the questions. Johnny Kokula asks, do I have any insight into how Sony handled its IPR business, mostly patents, when it started to grow as a global player? This is probably a tough one since I'm a lawyer in the tech field. I'll tell you what, I worked at a patent law firm that had Sony as a client, and I actually managed some of their trademark litigation in 1998 when I was still a law student. So I have a small bit of insight, very small bit of personal insight, which I can share, which is that all Japanese companies in the 1990s, it was like Japan, it was extremely shameful. There was a cultural taboo against being litigious. Like, being someone who takes someone else to court is just some sort of a scumbag who wants to drag everybody down. And so when I was handling patent lawsuits for Sony, Sony was trying to settle like slam dunk cases that you just go and pay the $50 court fee and you get an injunction and it will be over. And Sony wouldn't pay the court injunction fee because they believed if they're right, they should be able to negotiate and get a reasonable settlement with someone in Spain the same as they can in Japan. So Japan was like extremely anti-litigious, and it was, companies were against being litigious, and they were getting walked all over, frankly, by global companies as a result. What happened was in the 2000s, they sort of learned that it's better, you'll lose money, and people will take advantage of you if you don't stand up for yourself. So Sony learned, and I think it was part of Sony becoming more internationalized and frankly becoming more of a media company that was more centered on its assets that were in the US and protected by US IP lawyers. That Sony became more litigious and more protecting of its IP in a way consistent with the way American companies and European companies already were. So I think they became normal, basically. But they used to be a walkover, and they used to not be into that at all. But yeah, so I was there right when they were learning. I was tasked with trying to persuade, patent lawyers in Spain and South America and America, where they were saying, give me the $50 fee, I'll get your injunction. And I'm like saying, hey, Sony, let's give them the fee. They'll take care of it. And Sony's like, no, make them give up through negotiation. And I'd say, yeah, Sony wants you to negotiate with them and make them give up. And the Spanish lawyer's like looking at me like I'm speaking to him in Greek and saying, dude, it's just a $50 fee. It's all done. Like, seriously. And they'd spent millions of dollars trying to avoid paying like a $50 injunction in Spain in one case that I worked on. That was Sony of the 1990s. They're definitely not like that now. Now they are much more litigious, although they're still not a bad player, but that was a classic example. Eric Bailey, have I ever had to teach a bunch of Japanese high school students English using the story of the little girl whose hair fell out from radiation so she could bear the yellow ribbon her uncle bought her? No, I have not. Thank you for asking. I've never taught high school students. I did work in 1998 again during the summer vacation thing. I worked nights at a eikaiwa, and it was a fun job. I wouldn't want to do it as a career, but I did it. I've done my time. But I have not done that. I don't know that story. That sounds horrible. But thank you for asking. Eric Bailey also asks, it's like a German teaching German using the diary of Anne Frank as a material. Indeed, that's what it sounds like. My favorite nuke story is where they forced me to tell the story of the 3 elephants and asked me to make American sound effects. I imagine you had to simulate chewing gum and asking about baseball scores or something. Yeah, that's pretty awful. Wow, it's 11:45. I started late, but it's okay because I'm finishing even later. One more story tonight. Apparently, the last few days, both in Shikoku and Tohoku, as I've mentioned before, Japan has 8 power grids. Isolated, I say isolated, but that's too much of an exaggeration. It's not exactly right. There is a line through the middle of Japan, east and west, where they use different frequencies for how they transmit electricity. So they are incompatible between east and west, and they do have these large transformer stations at 2 or 3 choke points that barely work. But basically, Shikoku's a tiny island, and Tohoku's like the whole north of Honshu, and it's barely inhabited. However, both of those places have a lot of sunshine and wind and a lot of renewable energy, but not many people. And so because the renewable energy supply generated in those areas can only be used by people who live there, and it's been exceptionally sunny, we've had lovely weather the last few days, they've generated too much renewable energy, and the power companies in those areas have had to cut off the renewable energy companies because they haven't been able to use all the electricity, which is such a waste. If they were connected on a single national grid, you could have been using all of that clean energy in Tokyo, or you could have been diverting it into a pumped hydro sort of battery storage and using it later. But because they're on these crappy small grids, which is a legacy of the way that the power grid system was set up in Japan like in the 1870s, this all went to waste. And this is why, again, infrastructure, America is just coming to terms itself with the fact that it needs to spend money on infrastructure, and it's boring and it's expensive and it's a pain in the neck. But they're going to do that. So, they've got to do that in Japan because it's such a waste that they're actually improving renewables, but they can't use it. So anyway, that's all the stories that I have this week. It's been great. I do appreciate all of the comments and questions and topics. Johnny Kokula, that's super interesting. I'm gathering info for an IPR course project. Thank you. If you message me on Twitter, I'd be happy to tell you a little bit more about my insight on that. But fundamentally, Japan learned how to do IP litigation in the late 1990s and early 2000s, really. Big cases were IBM versus Fujitsu and a lot of Sony having trademark issues and so on. They were pussycats until the 1990s. They didn't protect their IP at all, and they learned the costs of not doing that, I think, in the early 2000s, and they became more normalized. But this is why those companies, thinking of Sony and Fujitsu in particular, basically have their IP litigation being run by their US subsidiaries, and doing that allowed those US subsidiaries to gain an awful lot of power within those Japanese companies, including appointing the CEO in the case of Sony. So, IP was actually, and IP litigation was actually pivotal in how companies like Sony actually, how they changed the realization that they had to deal with that, and people in Japan didn't have the skills for it. So they've come a long way, but yeah, it's a fascinating topic. Thank you for asking. Believe in yourself. Thank you for the thank you. I thank you for the thank you for the thank you. Dan H., you find it funny that no one has died from radiation poisoning and there is no increase in cancer because of Fukushima nuclear disaster. So much for nuclear fear. Yeah, I mean, I always thought it was kind of weird that, people were leaving Tokyo to evacuate to Hong Kong and exposing themselves to far more radiation, on the flights away than they would have experienced in a year of just staying put in Tokyo. Man, that's a long thing. I mean, look, there have been cases of people who worked in Fukushima who have died of leukemia and so on, and it's kind of a weird, freaky coincidence, even though they insist that there's no linkage from that. But certainly, yeah, it does show. And look, while Fukushima has not been as scary as everyone thought, if the accounts coming out of Ukraine at the moment are true, that those Russians were forced to dig trenches in the Chernobyl zone and they got sick from radiation poisoning, I mean, I'm honestly pretty much okay with pro-Ukraine propaganda at the moment. They can say whatever they like. They're the ones being invaded. I don't know if that's true or not, but if that's true, like, holy crap, it does show that just how much worse it was over there. Maybe a final note on Ukraine as well. In fact, there was a thing here about, Japan made a big parade about bringing 40 refugees back on the plane with the foreign minister, which does go on to the point that Dan H. said that there's a huge double standard, that all of a sudden now Japan's cool with refugees just because they're Ukrainian. And I think it's for two reasons. It's one, this idea that, they're blonde-haired, blue-eyed Europeans, which Japanese sort of fawn over, and the rest of the world is doing as well, and it's a complete double standard. But it's also Japan wanting to please and show that they're one of the club, and this is what Japan's wanted to be since 1919, and the world, and the Western world's always been kind of like, yeah, well, Japan's really kind of different. We're not really a real member of the club. But Japan's really wanted to do that, to show solidarity with military aid and participation and being part of the sort of this thing about showing support for Ukraine, which it's doing. That said, I mean, look, the final note, bit of a dark note, but I think I could see this early in the Uh, Early in the Ukraine conflict, it really looked like this was Putin just being an asshole, and I could feel as bad for the conscript soldiers that were being sent in to fight for no good reason in Ukraine as anyone else involved in the conflict, and seeing both sides and everyone as victims, and even the sanctions sort of not being wanting them to target the right people and not the wrong people, but looking at the conduct of ordinary Russian soldiers in Ukraine. I'm just going to disconnect that. Oh, that doesn't make a difference. This battery thing. But seeing, like, for example, the missile attacks on the train station of the Russian-speaking area of actual Donbass itself, and where thousands of people were packed into a train station to evacuate, and the Russians hit that with missiles. Seeing the Bucha, massacre, seeing what they're doing to civilians, often Russian-speaking civilians, that the whole pretext of this invasion was to go in and protect Russian-speaking Russian speakers from Ukraine. Russia, the whole fake justification for the invasion was to rescue these Russian speakers, and they're often the ones that Russia's carrying out these horrendous crimes against. And the fact that they're actually people are coming in and pretty much, real time, they're filming and they're showing their satellite photos. There's real time footage of people going into these liberated towns around Kiev and seeing all of these dead people and filming it. And, and the Russians just out of hand, the Russian foreign minister just saying that it's all just fake and made up. I mean, it's literally like, Germans saying that the Holocaust, camps were full of paper mache bodies and stuff like that. I mean, and just as repulsive. And it really has changed my opinion that this is all just Putin being wrong. And, when you see what those ordinary Russians have done, the looting, the human rights abuses, and, again, doing it all in a place where they shouldn't be. They shouldn't be there in the first place. Huge credit, I think, to Ukraine at how well they've fought. And obviously, now they know what they're fighting for. They're fighting to survive, and... again, I've thought that it wouldn't be good for us to get wrapped up in a war with Russia over this, and that we should keep an appropriate distance. And I thought it would end quickly, and that Ukraine didn't have a chance. And I'm thinking increasingly, I guess like a lot of people, one, this really is Russia really is being the bad guy now. It's hard to separate this now like before. And two, I really hope that we're not just looking after refugees. I think serious military aid, and America, it's great that they're providing lots of equipment, but you get the sense at a time sometimes they're just testing out drones and stuff like that. Give them fighter jets. Honestly, how afraid do you have to be of upsetting Putin when you see what they're doing? So maybe that's Ukrainian propaganda, whatever. Maybe they're enhancing it to sort of try to get help. But we should be giving it. We should be giving it. So I've really, the last couple of weeks, I think I've changed my view from trying to be balanced about this to really one-sidedly just hoping that Ukraine just kicks Russia's ass and gets them the hell out of there. I really hope. I don't see how it's going to end quickly, but I hope it does end, and I hope that we should be giving Ukraine everything it needs to defend itself. Just looking at the situation. So, a bit of a bummer to end the show on, but I'm glad that Japan's doing some small part to help, at least in that respect. I mean, but everybody stay cool. Have a good week. We are way over time. Thank you for keeping me company. Remember to like if you liked. I mean, couldn't rank it. The other thing is that, whatever happens anywhere is Russians shouldn't be in Ukraine in the first place. And I loathe the fact that something like murder is being is being treated as a partisan political football to be debated in America by any of the networks. I mean, I don't think it's that it's conceding, saying that that they shouldn't be there and they shouldn't be murdering people is just that shouldn't be a party political decision. It shouldn't be something that one network picks over another. It's just it's beyond ridiculous now. So anyway, all of that said, everybody stay cool. Have a good week, everybody. Remember to like if you liked. Thank you for keeping me company. I'll see you next week. Thank you for your patience last week, and I'll see you again soon. Remember, you can follow me on Twitter, all of that good stuff. Have a good week. Boom. Peace, everybody. It is indeed a complicated situation. See you all later. End stream.